2023 ended with a bit of a chaotic storm, and thankfully things are settling down. But before I can get back into some sort of rhythm to do things and get regular content out, I just have to relax a little bit. And what better ways to relax than play some build games? In my book, those games are usually the best way to relax, as they require a degree of focus that I can lose myself in, and are overall just not that action-packed. So yeah, that is how I got to Infraspace, a game where you have to build an efficient utopia with factories and roads and ensure a smooth supply chain. That sounds super relaxing and fun to do. What could possibly go wrong or be so challenging about... what was that? Okay, wait, hold on. It's the year 2351. Mankind created the warp drive and is now reaching for the stars to expand. A colony ship called the Antares, sent to colonize a planet far from Earth, unfortunately strands near a random planet after a malfunction. To repair the Antares, resources are required, and thankfully the planet they stranded on can provide them if the right infrastructure is built. And that task falls on to you, to build the needed infrastructure to gather the resources and to repair the ship, but also to build a new home for the colonists. Building games are usually not so heavy on their stories. It is always nice when a building game incorporates a story or a setting that heavily connects with the game mechanics. But usually it's like this, very straightforward and just there to kick the game off. And in this case, with Infraspace, we kick off with a classic sci-fi premise. After the initial setup, the story isn't really talked or thought about ever again, and we focus on the more important part of a building and management game. In Infraspace, you are building a city from the ground up and have to provide resources, not just to fix the spaceship, but also to keep your workers happy. Be that by food, water, education, or entertainment, or anything really. However, these resources that are produced have to be transported and delivered to places. And that is what Infraspace wants to focus on. Not only do you need to manage the resource production, but also its transportation. If you have ever played Satisfactory, Factorio, or even Anno, or for the veterans, Transport Tycoon, you will find a very similar experience here, as Infraspace grabs all those games and creates a rather simplistic mix of them. The early game in Infraspace is what you should expect. It's rather simple, as it's easy to keep transport fast, as distance between two destinations is very short, and the requirements/needs for your production and your citizens is not very high or complicated. If things are running at this stage, it will probably run for an eternity without any problem. And that is a good situation and atmosphere to start with in a build game. What I liked in particular is the lack of urgency, not just in the early stages of the game, but throughout the entire game. There's no timer or threat to keep an eye on, nor are there game-ending consequences right around the corner if you make a mistake early on. You can do, try, learn everything you want at your pace. And taking my time I did, as despite the good situation and atmosphere of the early game, it was still a bit wonky at times. Mainly because the tutorial of this game isn't very solid. Its direction is a bit vague and how it teaches you each aspect in the game is very loosely. At some point I accidentally clicked the tutorial box away and then the tutorial just didn't come back, so at that point I decided I was going to learn the ways of the game by just trying and see how far I could get. Which is something I don't mind doing in build games. And again, in Infraspace you get the room to do this, so nothing was really lost. There is, however, an in-game wiki, which is a lot better than the tutorial. It's easy and quick to access and its information is explained very clearly. Though the in-game wiki does not pardon the lack of a solid tutorial. In a game where you know things will ramp up with more complex mechanics, there should be a proper, clear and straightforward tutorial in my opinion. So if you're a new player and you don't enjoy trying to figure things out, be wary of a very rough tutorial. And I would recommend depending more on the in-game wiki instead. Still, early game is very relaxing and it's fun to see the humble beginnings of your colony and to plan ahead for it. Cause things will start to ramp up. As you fulfill the needs of your citizens, their habitats will update and require new things, but also their demands of certain needs they already have increase drastically. This more or less forces you to keep progressing forward, be that in research, exploring new resources and expand your infrastructure. And before you know it, you created a spaghetti monster of a road system that is the solid, well-organized backbone of your economy. While being present in the early game, the roads and traffic flow management aspects come more into play later on. In my opinion, these two aspects are the defining features of Infraspace, as you spend a decent amount of time on them, especially in late game. However, this is also where my experience with Infraspace started to become a bumpy ride. Infraspace offers a decent amount of options to manage and control traffic. These options vary from simple things like road types, updates for existing roads and such, to more complex ones like district agreements and a traffic manager where you can apply traffic signs and lights and you can customize lane orders for each junction you create. Dabbling in all these options is a lot of fun, especially exploring them the first time. However, when I dabbled in them for a while, I noticed that while they are helpful, they are not making the biggest difference. Whenever I was solving a traffic jam with new roads or better designs of my junctions, it always felt like those things had a small chance in really fixing the problem. Now, I know for a fact that I am not the best at these kind of games, but in many situations I encountered in Infraspace, I knew where the problem was coming from and what the required solutions could be. But the game just does not offer me the options to implement said solutions. For example, you can't control the amount and way new traffic is introduced into your network. Buildings mostly store their surplus of resources themselves. Meaning that if you build a lot of new buildings at the same time that require these saved up resources, your road system will be flooded with more than usual amounts of trucks. Because instead of supplying a steady flow of resources to these new buildings, slowly building up the storage and not overloading your road network, the game instead decided for you that all possible resources just must be dumped on these new buildings all at once right away. Which logically is not a good way to go about it, as it will flood your road network with too many trucks in a small amount of time. Now, the game offers somewhat of a solution to this through distribution centers, which serves as a middle drop-off point for your resources in the supply chain. But there are a lot of small problems with them as well. They can only house one resource type at a time, and they work with an annoying area of effect. And they still come with the fanatic dumping of resources that I just described. The only thing that they solve is that the overflow of traffic, and therefore the traffic jams, stay more localized. Which does help your overall road network, but it does not solve the problem of traffic jams and the fanatic dumping of resources. Things could have been worse though if the pathfinding in this game was bad, but thankfully most of the time it's actually quite good. Though it sometimes has the tendency to bug out, and while I don't mind bugs, I do mind it that they can break your entire road network, as it can cause traffic jams and delays without any reasons and without any real solutions. You can try to replace the road or check if there are small kinks or short road sections created by the game's automatic road smoothing system, which sometimes solve these bugs or the annoying habit of traffic slowing down for no reason. However, the bigger your road system becomes, the more often this can happen and the more micromanagement is required of you. Another annoying thing that kept happening is that seemingly at random, created lane paths I set got resetted or undone. This added a degree of mistrust in my mind, and I noticed that often I was just constantly checking lane paths just to be sure things were as I set them a couple of hours ago. Then there are trains. They are more stable than road traffic, and they are a great solution for transporting resources over a long distance. Of course, building a train network is a different task than a road network, and it's up to you to design proper train routes to be as efficient as possible. However, even here, the control you have is very limited. You have to set up a train line and tell them where they need to go, but you can't pick the resources they have to pick up on the station. You have to manipulate or trust the game that it can decide perfectly what the ideal route is for certain resources, which can be a struggle at times, and that is why sometimes you have to manipulate it a bit here and there. Because train networks are very expensive in terms of resources, and it's very annoying and disappointing when you put so much effort and resources into building a train network only to see it never be fully used. Personally, I wish the train and distribution center systems were swapped. I would have felt more comfortable making train networks if I could dedicate better which resources would be transported. And many of my traffic issues and problems with the distribution center would be solved if I was able to make a general collecting point for resources via warehouses. Nonetheless, things could be worse, and despite my rather weaker skill at the game and its random traffic bugs from time to time, I managed to make it work as much as possible. Not always the most efficient way, but work nonetheless. And Infraspace doesn't mind this or punishes you for it, unlike other games. The world you are building in isn't harsh, and there is no time limit or urgency to think about. Nor is there a way of building you must adapt to be successful in this game. And that attitude is exactly what I liked a lot of Infraspace. What Infraspace promises and sets out to do, it does it okay. But unfortunately, it doesn't excel at any of its aspects. Building games that came before did certain aspects as well, and they were noticeably better at it. That does not take away from the fact that I enjoyed Infraspace. I was able to relax a lot while playing it, but be challenged when I felt like it, only to complete something and go back to a slower, more relaxing pace. The game was perfectly for playing it semi-AFK while watching some videos on the second monitor or listening to an extensive lore video or podcast. And while being weaker and more simplistic than the game's Infraspace tries to mix up, you will feel a very similar sense of accomplishment whenever a plan you got worked out or when you solve certain problems, just like in those games. Challenges can feel just as daunting, but here in Infraspace they are faced at your own pace and does not take away from the nice, comfy, relaxing building experience it offers. And therefore, I would recommend this game to people that seek that kind of experience of a build game. Especially if you enjoy games like Satisfactory or Factorio, but want to experience something similar in a more simplistic sense and slower pace.